There's got to be a class that we can talk about these creative ways to invest. So that's why we're here. This is Lewis. Lewis, introduce yourself.
Lewis Copelli, loan officer, mortgage broker, actually now. Kind of a cool shift that I've made with my career. Been in retail for most of my career, and now I have access to like 100 different lenders that we can go to, which has been super exciting. So kind of my role on the lending side is just taking somebody's unique scenario and finding the right bank and the right program for them. And had the pleasure of working with Carissa for, years now. Crazy how time flies like that. And really, I'm sure we've gotten to know each other mostly just with the Zillow leads that we've been purchasing and getting opportunities to work with everybody and kind of seeing these different scenarios. And I think that pairs really nicely with some of these ideas and programs that we're going to talk about today, because I think people oftentimes don't know what they don't know. And if we can plant a seed or speak intelligently about opportunities, because we ourselves as lenders or realtors or just investors in general would make this deal happen for ourselves if we had the ability, we can then articulate that to our clients and present opportunities. So excited to be here today. And I think we'll be able to cover some cool topics and hopefully get our minds thinking about ways to create opportunities for our clients and for ourselves to create wealth and build wealth through real estate.
Yeah. And again, it's coming back to questions that I have literally asked Lewis, because I have a son, and we can just go into the first one. I have a son who is going to be 18 in March. And, there's all these different questions that come and arise depending upon what he decides he wants to do. So in this scenario, the first scenario, I have a son who's starting helicopter school, right? Or is contemplating that and wants to be really close to the airport. And so that he can maximize the hours that he's not in training, he wants to be close to the airport. Okay, in that case, if I am an investor, scenarios are the most helpful for me when I'm thinking about how I could help someone or a client, but also myself. Like, okay, I have, some money to spend, and depending upon the scenario, maybe I could get creative, right? That's usually how the conversation starts. So if I've got a son who is looking to build credit and is looking for housing, the regular conversation would be, okay, go find a place to rent. If like you're an adult now, go be free, spread your wings, literally, right? So in that case, he would be looking for rentals. Is there a cheap rental in Prescott anywhere near the airport that's under $1,000 a month, unless you're going to share and be a roommate, right? You're going to be a roommate, right? But that situation, still, you're probably looking at about $1,000 a month just to live, for housing expenses. That's not even including your share of the utilities, like just to live. So then it's like, okay, well, what does it cost if I, as a parent, decided to look at investing in a property? So I actually printed a property that I think fits the bill on Marigold. It's close to the airport. It's listed at $480,000. It's been on the market 48 days. And I think that we could probably put an offer in if we were looking at days on market and just original list price is $480,000. Let's say we got aggressive and we came in at $450,000, and we were looking to do some sort of creative financing. So, Lewis, if I wanted to help my son get into this house, he were to occupy the house, and he were to get 3 roommates, or 2 roommates, right? Because this is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. What would that look like? Can I do that? And why?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so I did a video on this about 4 or 5 years ago. The agencies, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and even Ginnie Mae, so that's for more of your government financing. they actually have a program specifically designed for this. It's called the Kitty Condo Purchase. And the name Kitty Condo, don't be kind of confused that it's only specific to condos. It can be done for single family or a duplex. But the idea is exactly what you were just thinking. Like, I've got a child, and kind of the spirit of the program is you've got somebody that's going to school. Maybe they're in their second or third year. Housing expenses for a child going to on-campus housing is pretty expensive. What if we were to get a house for our son or daughter, and maybe they've got a couple roommates, right?
Mm-hmm.
And typically, when you're buying an investment property, the conversation starts at 20% down, and really, with the current rate environment, 25 is kind of the sweet spot for investment. That's a lot of money for somebody to kind of tie up their capital to buy an investment property. But what if we could change the dynamic and say you could put 3.5% down,
Mm-hmm.
or perhaps put 5% down for conventional financing? That's the scenario that becomes available with the Kitty Condo Purchase. And the other thing is that instead of being an investment interest rate, which typically is about a point higher than owner-occupied financing, you're going to get the owner-occupied interest rate. So less money down, you're going to get a sharper interest rate. And the bigger thing is that like moving forward for that parent who's putting the capital up front and kind of absorbing some of the risk in terms of carrying the loan, they're going to be able to get a tax write-off now because they're going to get that 1099 at the end of the year for the mortgage interest paid. And granted, the child could take that if they wanted to, but you'll have a decision, and typically the parents are going to want to get that tax benefit. And so these are the scenarios that we play out for people. And the other thing that's super cool is you can do that in reverse. So let's say you are, son or daughter, and your parents are getting older and they need more help. I literally just closed a loan last month doing this. 92-year-old husband and wife. They didn't want to go to assisted living. They wanted to live closer to the kids, and they found a home in the same neighborhood as the kids. And what the kids did is, based upon kind of the financials, they're on Social Security and a small pension. They were able to say, we're going to break even by structuring this loan as a reverse Kitty condo. But now we've got our parents close. We can take care of them. And the money that we were going to pay to put them in an assisted living, we can take that difference and give them a better quality of life, keeping them in the same neighborhood. And the same concept applies. And so that's a way to kind of start planting seeds in your clients' kind of minds who may not know that this option is available. The one kind of perceived downside to that strategy is like you're putting less money down, so you've got to find out if the cash flow's there. But for the Kitty Condo Purchase, like if you've got 3 kids living in a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house, and they're each paying $1,000 a month in rent, and maybe it's in a nicer neighborhood, or maybe it's got other amenities, that's something that could be an absolute win for everybody involved. I'm actually doing a few little seminars over at NAU to some of the sororities and fraternities, and we were talking about this very subject because somebody in those rooms is got that entrepreneurial mindset, and they're like, hey, I want to get a house. They just don't know that they can do this. And the parents want to invest. They look at the amount that they're spending for on-campus housing. This is a home run for those folks that have thought about this and just didn't know that this opportunity presents itself. Now, when the kid goes to graduate eventually, there is kind of a clean exit strategy. So if the parents make the mortgage payment from their account with just their name on it for consecutive 12 months, if the child were to go to finance a home, let's say 3 or 4 years later, they're not going to be impacted by that debt being on their credit. We can exclude that from their qualification because the parents can document that they've been paying the mortgage. The reverse can also be done. So if the kid's paying the mortgage from their account and can do it for 12 months, it won't impact the parents from their ability to get credit down the road. So there's ways to do that. And then obviously at some point, if the kids want to refinance or the parents want to refinance the property, that's definitely an opportunity that's there.
So the occupying happens with the child
with
in
the
the
child,
home for
correct.
2 years, right? It's a 2-year rule, correct?
So occupancy, when you sign the final documents, it's a 12-month commitment is typically what you're signing up for. So 12 months for owner occupied. But let's say you buy the house and 8 months in, your daughter or son ends up getting transferred to another school, right? They got an opportunity, whatever it may be. Nobody's going to come knocking on the door and saying, hey, you need to pay the note back. It's not typically how this goes. You'd have an opportunity to put other tenants in there without having to adjust the terms of your loan. So I think the spirit of the rule is like somebody's got to occupy for 12 months, in this
Sure.
case, the child. But life happens. And if the intention of it was pure and there wasn't some shady business from the beginning, and it's not like you close and day one it's on Zillow and Airbnb for rent, like those life things aren't going to prevent, you from still being able to rent the property out. But 12 months is kind of the commitment
12
that you'd be
months.
signing.
Okay, that's good to know, because I think especially when you have young people, their lives are so flexible and they have lots of opportunities being presented to them. And so it's good to know that 12 months is the rule or the guideline.
Yes.
That's helpful to know. So like in this scenario on Marigold Drive at $450,000, when I talked with Lewis about this with a 3.5% FHA loan, the payment before taxes and insurance was $2,600. So if we round up to $2,800 a month for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home that's built in 2000, okay, and you had three people paying that mortgage, that's a lot more doable. And with the future rental income that you could, get later once he moves out, or if you used it to, a straight long-term rental to someone else later for 3.5% down, that's pretty amazing compared to the normal percentage. And I think that was why we brought that one up.
Can this be done with FHA or conventional?
Correct. Yeah. So you can do it with FHA. Conventional has a higher down payment requirement at 5%. The reason you might consider conventional, it may be the condition of the property, right? Like maybe it needs a little TLC and might have trouble with an appraisal. Maybe the price point is above the FHA max loan limit. That could also be a reason. And when you're putting these minimum downs, like even in that scenario, what's cool is like with 3 tenants, $1,000 a piece, they're cash flowing. So like you're not in the hole, but the win for the client, the win for in this situation is like you're not investing your full capital, right? Almost $100,000 to put 20+% down, which feels out of reach for a lot of people. But if they're like, hey, I got 30 grand sitting around that I'd like to invest in real estate, I'm going to be paying this money anyways to what have you, housing,
whatever,
right?
Yeah.
Might as well give ourselves an opportunity to put it into an appreciating asset. So and that's a real scenario. Like I just did this recently, like I mentioned for the reverse scenario. They ended up putting 10% down. They thought when they came to me, and this was what was really cool about just educating people, they came to me saying, I need to buy an investment property. And I think what I try to do as a lender is I try to hear the story, because everybody has a story when they come to us. And then they start telling me the situation. My parents, they're older. We want to get them closer to us. And then I go ahead and tell them, I'm like, what if I could tell you instead of putting 20% down, you could put 5 or 10, and we could get you an interest rate that's a point lower than you've been quoted. And their minds were just blown. They had no idea that was there, and it was just a home run for them. So we have the opportunity to kind of, again, help people as we hear their story, because a lot of folks are trying to do this right now.
Well, and then so the next scenario, like if we go to number 2, this is also something that I was like, can I invest with my best friend and buy an investment? And what if they want to occupy and I don't? Like I have a house and I don't want to have to go move into one of the units, but they are interested in building wealth too, and we kind of go in on a small little venture together. What does that look like? So this is another example of something. I pulled a listing that also is super old, but may be an option depending upon what Lewis says. I wanted actually to get Lewis's take on this 1951 built, 1,158 square feet multifamily that's basically already has some income proven, and then has the other one that one of the people could occupy. And does it matter if we occupy, if we're going in together, if it's not my family member? So anyway, I just had I was curious to know what you would do so that we could minimize the amount of cash down.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
So whenever you're thinking like, investing in real estate, so investment versus owner occupied, that's where the cash to close comes into play. So
Mm-hmm.
whenever you're trying to think and you have a client scenario and they're like, hey, I'm tight on funds to close, your immediate thought needs to be like, is there any scenario where this could be a primary residence for you, right? Because if it's
Right.
going to be a strict investment from day one and there's no occupancy, 20% again is kind of where that number starts. And if your client doesn't have the capital to do that, or you yourself don't have the capital to do that, that's where you got to start thinking creative about like occupancy, right? That's where we start going there.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this type of scenario, so like we had a client, a Zillow client recently, Zoe Ballard, right?
Zoe, yep.
Now Zoe bought a manufactured home. She didn't buy a duplex, which this scenario is kind of presenting on there, but the scenario is kind of similar. Zoe has her significant other, and Zoe had the credit and the stable income. The significant other had the down payment. And so together they were the perfect pair to buy this property. And that same kind of mindset could apply here, where you've got two, entities, two people who are wanting to invest in real estate together. Maybe somebody's got the credit and the income. Maybe somebody's got the down payment. For whatever reason, they both can't be on a loan together, right? And that was Zoe's situation. Zoe had the credit and the income. The partner did not have the credit, but she had the money. They can absolutely be on title together. We're going to structure the loan in a way that best suits their situation. So whether it's from a rate perspective or the right program or the right terms. And in this scenario, what we would want to find out is who's occupying. Whoever's
Mm-hmm.
occupying the property, they're going to have to be on the loan. And we would need to make sure that 12-month kind of
Mm-hmm.
commitment of them living in the property is met. Again, life changes can happen. If 9 months down the road, they, let's say they work for a hospital, they get relocated to another hospital, the story makes sense, right? The spirit of, or the intention of the occupancy was pure from the beginning. So we just have to protect people from themselves. Sometimes they think they're going to get past somebody. And I'll give you some real life examples where occupancy got a little sideways. Got a client closing on an owner occupied property, and the day of closing, the investor went on to Google, searched the property, and it was all over Airbnb, rent,
Mm-hmm.
red flags, right across the board. Had another client close. It's their owner occupied home. They called the servicing company and said, hey, can you forward the mortgage statement to my primary residence, which was a different address? These are problems. You know what I mean? You gotta think through these situations. So we're going to
Mm-hmm.
protect people from themselves sometimes. And we want to make sure the intention is there. But for this scenario, 100%, you got two people, maybe somebody's got the money, somebody's got the credit and the income, whatever the scenario is, they can go on it together. That entity that's not on the loan will not, or that entity that's on title will not be on the loan in that situation, but they'll both have ownership interest in the property based upon being on title. There are some cons to that. If it's not somebody that, maybe it's not family, and this can get sideways even with family and relationships, but at some point you're a buyer, this is an investment, you're going to be a seller. And if you guys have philosophical differences on the future of that property and what you want to do with it, it can get a little weird, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually dealing with this with a client right now. And we typically see this more so in like a divorce situation, right? Where people are getting separated and they have different opinions on how they want to, leverage this asset. But that's the same situation that you're going to be facing if you go in on an investment with somebody, is what does the exit strategy look like for you?
Mm-hmm.
And there's different protections that you can put in place. But I think ultimately, this is something that people are doing now. I see a lot of folks that aren't married buying together just because of the cost of housing. And it's something that we should at least educate people on, because they don't know that. A lot of times people think they need to have some kind of familial or a marriage relationship to be able to buy property together. And that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
And we see this with investors too. They got a business partner and they're buying properties. I mean, that happens all the time. You just have to be aware of the implications on it.
Yeah, I just think it's kind of, I think it's important for us to bring it back to like real scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
And then like, can the occupant, could they have obtained a different FHA? Can you get more than one FHA loan? Like if you have a primary that you're moving out of and renting to get another FHA, can you have two FHA loans at the same time?
This is an awesome question. You can, but there's this thing called the 100-mile rule with FHA. So what FHA doesn't want to do is empower people to buy a bunch of investment properties with 3.5% down and 620 credit scores. Like that's
Yeah.
not the spirit of FHA loans, right? Kind of designed for first-time buyer. My credit's not quite there. I need minimum down, that kind of thing. But there are circumstances where having a second FHA loan is capable. So let's say you live in Phoenix, you have an FHA loan, and you get relocated for work to Tucson. And the relocation to work can be documented. You've got an offer letter from this new company. And you own this property. And here's where it gets a little different with FHA. FHA wants you to have at least 25% equity in the departing primary residence.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to have some equity built up in that property. But if you have that, and they're going to require an appraisal on that home. So you're going to get an appraisal on your departing residence as well as the new purchase. You could then buy in Tucson conceivably with a 3.5% down FHA loan. There's other scenarios too where we're talking about this kitty condo program. If you bought a property FHA with a non-occupying cosigner, and you are now going to buy your own home, you can, and the 100-mile rule still applies, you can also, you don't have to have the relocation for work, you can buy another property FHA 3.5% down if we can document you had a non-occupying cosigner. So there's ways to have multiple FHA loans. This is another Zillow lead that we just had, Sri Thoda.
Yep.
Okay, he bought an FHA, he used an FHA loan to buy a property in Pine, Arizona. He owned a property here in Phoenix. I'm not kidding you. I did the Google MapQuest because I knew about the 100. There's 98 miles difference between his current home and the property in Pine. I mean, by that much, we got it. But his scenario made sense. He's older. He's been with his company forever. He works remote. He had this vision of living in Pine, kind of a quieter life. He's going to rent out the house in Phoenix. And he bought with 3.5% down, beautiful little manufactured home up there, and he's happy as can be. So you can do that. You can, but there are some implications for it. Conventional's way more lax. Like I've had a ton of clients that have built real estate portfolios by buying a property, 5% down conventional, they live in it for a year, and then they buy another one. And they do it again and again and again. VA has similar things too. You can have more than one VA loan. There's things called bonus entitlement, where veterans, if they haven't used up all their entitlement, they can buy multiple properties with a VA loan. There's a calculation we have to do for that. But you can build these portfolios, and a lot of people do that, and that's how they buy multiple properties, putting minimum down. They live in them for a certain amount of time, and then they move up. The story has to make a little sense. Like you can't have like a 3,000 square foot, $1.2 million home and then decide, oh, I'm going to buy a $300,000 manufactured home. Like underwriting is going to be like, that seems very investment to me coming from where you're at. But let's say you bought a starter home, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 5% down. You lived in it for a year. You got married. You have a child now. Now you buy the 4-bedroom, 2-bath. You went up in price. That makes sense. Then maybe, careers are expanding. You're moving to a new part of town. Okay, we buy another property. The story behind it kind of matters. We paint a picture to underwriting. But we can do that all day long. I've got a guy, Rob Bundrick, who's got 8 properties, and he bought all 8 of them with minimum down.
That's awesome.
And he didn't know. He just needed somebody to tell him that you can do this, and you have to have the story make sense. It can't not align with what an underwriter would look like. And in this scenario here, I mean, how cool is that? You buy a property, you live in one unit. There's cash flow on the other side. There's a pro forma. You're there for your year. Maybe it's not super sexy living in a duplex with a friend for a year, but maybe you tough it out for 12 to 18 months, and then you bounce and you rent it out, and then you have an investment property. It's just a way to be creative on the financing end.
Yeah, and I think that this is all long game strategy. Cash flow is a really good, short-term play. But I think cash flow is just one factor. It's also the equity that you gain over time and that percentage of return versus the cash flow, and then using that immediately for your regular day-to-day. That really only works, I think, if you're doing lots of those, like along the road, like somebody who's kind of buying with 3.5% down over and over again. and kind of doing the live in the property for 12 months and then move, and then live in the property for 12 months and move. And that's a strategy. But I think overall, you're really looking at the long game for this kind of strategy, just like you would be if you're saving for retirement and you're putting money away into a 401k, or if you're buying bonds and treasuries and long-term gains. So it's all looking at what is the overall rate of return. And that, when you're talking to investors that you're helping buy these kind of properties, that's usually their mindset. They're looking at how much income am I making from the investment, and how much do I need to make in order to justify the money going in and sinking into this investment long term, versus putting it somewhere else and getting an 8% return, or a high yield savings at 6%, or right now it's like 5%. But what's important is, like, if you're thinking like an investor and you're trying to build your own wealth, then it's easier to have the conversation with somebody who's also trying to do that, and you're going to gain clients along the way because they feel like you're kind of winning with them. So that's really important to think about. And like, for instance, on this other example that I wrote in here, I presented this to Lewis on Lincoln Avenue when it came on the market as a new listing a couple weeks ago. And it had a pro forma attached, which I did print. So you can see what a pro forma looks like, because a lot of people are going, what's a pro forma? What's that? When we say that word, what does that mean, Lewis?
So, and this is brilliant that you printed this off, because when you're talking to investors, a lot of times buying real estate to them is kind of a balance sheet move, right? They may have money invested in stocks or bonds, like you said, and they're looking to just maybe pivot money from one asset class to another, right? And so when you look at these pro formas, this is just like a dividend on a stock. Like, what is the performance of this property? If I were to invest my money and say, take it from a blue chip stock, cash that out, put it into this property, what is my rate of return? They're looking at cap rates. Like, that's how they determine decisions on whether to invest or not. And what's really cool, and this is like an awesome segue into some other super cool financing, there are loans out there for investors that don't look at the actual borrower's personal financials whatsoever. They look at the performance of the property as kind of the litmus test as to whether or not it would qualify for a loan, which is huge, right? Because if you can show a pro forma to a lender and say, hey, this property's, netting out XYZ, in this case, I think is that 67,000?
Yeah, the gross.
The gross, right?
Yeah.
So $67,000-ish a year in income. If we're just going to use easy math, that's like roughly $5-ish grand a month. And let's say the mortgage payment is $4,000 a month, putting 25% down on this investment. Now we've got roughly a 1.25, 1.25 DSCR ratio, debt service coverage ratio. People will write loans and give somebody a loan for that property without looking at any of their personal financials. And that loan is designed for the investor whose tax returns do not tell the story. Because as investors, a lot of times they're taking advantage of tax write-offs and different strategies to limit their tax liability. And so you'll get a tax return from an investor who's really, crushing it, doing really well. But you look at the adjusted gross income and it's really thin, and we can't qualify them for a traditional loan. You provide a pro forma like this, and you document good credit, and you document some reserves and a healthy down payment, that borrower can get a loan. And that's a great, powerful tool, because a lot of these investors don't know that these programs are out there, and they just, in their minds, tell themselves, well, I'd love to invest in this property. That's money there that I could easily put my capital into, but I don't think I can get a loan because my taxes are, I get pretty aggressive with my tax return. That program is debt service coverage ratio loan. So if you start seeing some properties like this and you're like, man, this thing's cash flowing like crazy, that's where you can start reaching out to your sphere, or maybe an internet lead comes in and you can start having these conversations and being like the conversation starts here, like, take a look at this pro forma. Like, if you were thinking about investing 20 or 25% down, like, we could be making X amount per month in passive cash flow for you. That's a really cool conversation starter versus like, look at this super cool home. It's got great paint and beautiful,
Right. Well, that leads into the 1031 exchange, right?
Yes.
Because if you've got somebody who is thinking they're going to use a 1031 to invest in rental properties, and they're thinking single family, this should also be on the list, because if their down payment of 25% is coming from the 1031 exchange and it is at equal or higher value, then they can just basically double down and increase the income that they're making based on the equity they're making from the other property without having a tax implication. And so, like, if you're somebody, but then I actually think I think there's a lot of people that generally understand how a 1031 works, in that you have a deferring tax event where you don't have to pay taxes as long as as long as the money doesn't touch your bank account, right? And that seems like everybody's pretty familiar with that in general. I mean, some people are not, but let's assume everyone is. It's the little investor like me who doesn't have a 1031 in play, that I'm trying to maximize the cash I have to get a property like this. And so that's why I wanted to kind of talk about the creative ways that we could do that. If I've got good credit and I don't have 25% down, what do I do to get this property? So Lewis, what do I do if I've got 5%? What do I do?
Great question. And maybe I can back up just a little bit. Does everyone in the room kind of know, like, what is your potential capital gain on an owner-occupied property if you're a single individual or married? Does anybody know that?
There isn't capital gains on an individual property.
If it's your owner-occupied, there is actually. Yeah. So as a single individual, it's anything above 250,000, right? And title is going to have a 1099 that gets issued when you're selling property, and so that's how the government's going to document that from a taxable event. As a married couple, 500,000 is the cap. So it's important to know those, and there's ways with your accountant, and we're not tax professionals, so we don't give tax advice. But whenever I have a client, and we see this a lot in California, right? These guys have been there eons, and they're selling a $400,000 home, and now it's 1.8 million. That's a big taxable event. And so some of the things that can offset that is, like, what if you improve the home, right? What if you have all these renovations and you can document that with, maybe you did a roof and an AC and this big bathroom, whatever it may be, that gets deducted, right, from your capital gains in that type of scenario if you're above that threshold. The other thing is real estate commissions. All of those get deducted from there. So it's important to do that math whenever you're doing a listing appointment or anything with a client. If you start some conversations about what a taxable event could be, it just kind of elevated your status, because now you're like really talking about, like, the investing side of real estate and what their potential implications are. And people will really appreciate that, because the last thing they want to do is meet with their accountant a year and a half or a year later after they sold their home, and they're like, oh my gosh, I owe this huge check and I had no idea. So it's good to start, I think, sometimes with owner occupied, because there are taxable events, but it's really generous, right? 250 and 500. Like, in what other scenarios, investing wise, can you take 250 grand and not pay taxes on it, or $500,000 not pay taxes? Like, that is huge. That's a big reason why I really firmly believe in building wealth through real estate. Like, where in the stock market can you do that? Like, when you sell stocks with your brokerage account, like, you're getting taxes, right? So very powerful, and it's something that I think doesn't get talked about enough. The 1031 exchange applies when you've got an investment property. So, like, and this is important to know, like, you got a client, let's say they do that kitty condo or something like that, right? So they buy this property, owner occupied, they move out. Now suddenly next year they've got rental income on their taxes that is now an investment property. They are no longer afforded the $250,000 or $500,000 exclusion from capital gains. Their option then is to work with these 1031 exchange companies, if they were to want to sell that property, transfer the equity into a new property without getting hit with taxes. And there's companies out there that you can reach out to, and these are entities that handle the money. If the money goes into the borrower's or the client's personal account, taxable events, right? So I always say when anybody's doing a 1031 exchange, that the conversation starts with them first. Get set
Mhm.
up with them, make sure you've got all your ducks in a row before you start identifying or selling properties. Um, and what's a little bit stressful about a 1031, okay, is let's say a client gets this idea that they want to sell, right? And obviously they need the money from this house to buy the next property. Well, 1031 exchanges can create a little bit of an urgency for the client because once that property is sold, they only have 45 days to identify a replacement property.
Mhm.
That's kind of tough, right? And like what happens sometimes is people get so stressed in this process, they end up settling, right, on the property that they buy. And we don't want them to settle. As lenders and realtors, we love people that are doing 1031s because like that's as motivated as it gets, right? Like they're buying, you know what I mean?
They are. They have
Home
to.
inspection came out a little sketchy. They're buying, you know, like they're moving forward. So we love these clients because we know they're motivated. They're thinking about, they're not thinking so much about little details. They're thinking about the taxable event, and that's driving a lot of the decision making. But to your point, like, what if we could tell an investor, instead of giving you 45 days to find a replacement property, what if we could tap into the equity in your home, get the money for the down payment, buy your property that you've identified first, and then sell afterwards and pay yourself back and pay the 1031 exchange so that you are buying property at your pace and not this 45-day window. That's a real scenario that we can do on the lending side, and a lot of investors don't know this. Here's some things that are interesting about 1031 exchanges. It's done through an LLC. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac do not allow clients to close in an LLC. So you're looking at what's called a non-QM loan, non-traditional financing. And a non-QM loan is, in this space, has blown up the last few years. It's designed for investors, self-employed entrepreneurs. There's a lot of backing for these loans now. But basically, the non-QM lenders say, we get it. 1031 is a huge part of the real estate investing world. We're going to provide financing vehicles for people. And the big thing is they allow somebody to close in an LLC. Rates are a little bit higher on non-QM loans, not a ton, but factor in probably a quarter to 0.3% higher, but you get to close in the LLC. The clients don't really care about the slightly higher rate because they know it's taxes, right? They know that they're going to get hit big time with taxes if they don't close in this LLC. So that's the big one to talk about. And the 1031 exchange company creates the LLC. So that's why it's important to start with them, okay? And it's important to work with a lender that has access to investors that allow you to close in an LLC. If you go to like your local credit union or some of the big banks, like they're like, sorry, we don't do that, right? So these are specialized lenders that understand 1031 exchanges and they allow you to close in there. There's this also, so the topic I was talking about before about kind of flipping the dynamic. How do you get the equity first? How do you not have this pressure buy? That's a reverse 1031 exchange. And this is where you guys can start going to your past clients who've got these properties, who maybe they want to diversify their portfolio. Well, if you have this like amazing $1 million home in Sedona, but maybe the Airbnb market's not as tight as it used to be, they want to diversify a little bit. This is a real scenario I have. A client who sold is like a $1.6 million home in Sedona, and they took that 1.6 free and clear, and they bought 4 properties. They turned 1 into 4. Home run for them. But in that scenario, they to buy 4 properties, imagine trying to identify 4 in 45 days. Super stressful, right? What they did is we kind of talked to them about this reverse 1031. We were able to do a bridge loan on their home to get access to the equity. We put 50% down on those other 4 loans. We partnered with the 1031 exchange company, and I've got this investor Lensure that allows you to close and do reverse 1031s. And what's kind of interesting about the reverse is getting a little technical here, but on the reverse, the LLC, your client is not a managing member of the LLC, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. That would mean we're closing and funding a loan in the name of an LLC that your client and customer is not the owner of, right? A little bit of risk there, right? From the lending side. There's like 2 lenders that I know of that are allowing the reverse 1031, but what a powerful tool. If you could go to your clients and say, hey, I can get the equity with a bridge. You've found your homes, right? Let's lock up the homes, get them dialed, do the bridge, and then when you sell, you pay yourself back, right? You can pay back whatever investment you've put in. You can pay down the balances on those loans, and you can close within the parameters that the reverse 1031 exchange company is going to have for you. I've been calling 1031 exchange companies to let them know we have this program. And if you guys kind of get educated in this and start calling these 1031 exchange companies and being like, I understand 1031 and reverse 1031. If you have clients that have questions, I'm a local agent, I'm happy to help them. They'll start calling you. Like, I know of a lender who's doing these in Utah, like near Park City, and this gal is crushing it there, and she gets all her business from 1031 exchange companies because they know she's the expert, right? She knows how to kind of get these deals done. So that was like an insane amount of information. I know there's probably questions, but I think the take-home message is the equity's in the home. If you don't have the money, let's get the equity from the home. The question is, how do we get it? Do you need to sell, or do you need to do a loan on the property? And that will change the dynamic. And the relationship, whether it's a 1031 or reverse 1031, will also impact how the financing is structured. So I think to kind of simplify it for everyone is like, just because they don't have the cash on hand, we know the equities in their home. It's our job as the real estate professional to let them know, hey, let's put the equity to work. We can get it. Bridge loan, or you can sell if you feel very confident in the property to sell quickly. We can do that, but that's how we turn 1 into 4. That's how we diversify our portfolio. And going back to the performas, imagine if you had found 4 properties for your client and said, look at the perform on all these short-term rentals in Cottonwood, right? They're absolutely crushing it. This is a great area. I know you have that property on 123 North Street. It's been doing okay for you. What if we could turn that into these 4 and look at the cash flow on that property, or on that now 4 properties that you traded 1 for? That's the kind of stuff where like we can create deals and opportunities for our clients because we can see the potential behind it.
Or just, I think, to bring it back to us personally, if we have equity in our house and the interest rate goes down and we want to do a HELOC to pull the money out, that there is scenarios where it does make sense to make your equity work for you instead of it just sitting in that one investment.
For sure.
Again, it just depends on your situation, but like, I'm, very like anti-risk. It's scary situation, but depending upon what's going on, it may make sense to do that if the numbers make sense. I mean, it has to pencil, right? It can't be just a potential income. It's got to be there already. But pro forma really helps you with that because you're going to confirm all of this stuff. And then I think you can make offers to make deals what you want them to be. And I think that's my next point is, one of the questions I thought would be really interesting is, out of this LaRue Street property or the Lincoln property, which is a better bet, even if they're completely different price points? From Lewis's point of view, I know putting you on the spot, Lewis, even though it's a bigger price tag, which investment is a better bet? And that's a very loaded question, because from an investor's standpoint, that is a real question. Because if I'm going, okay, here's multifamily properties, they go, I want to go look at duplexes, or I want to go look at duplexes. I want to use this money that I've got sitting around that I know is going to be a tax. I'm either going to get taxed on this, or I got to move it into something. I got to try to shield my tax, liability. How do I do that? And it's like, okay, so what is the better bet here?
No, and we talked about this one.
Yes.
Okay, so here's what's kind of interesting on the financing end. So the agencies, like for example, like FHA and conventional, they understand that people have these thoughts, like, what if I lived in one unit and rented the other 3 out, right? They have created what's called a self-sufficiency test. And that's part of the qualification with these homes. So even if they allow you to put 3.5% down, we have to know that the other 3 units carry the mortgage payment. And that's not going to factor in or cash flow sometimes at our current home prices and current interest rates. So that's part of the test that we have to do. And as an investor, it kind of makes sense. Like, would you do that deal if your rents weren't covering the mortgage payment, right? And so the agencies have created that. Now, typically, and keep in mind, duplex, this is important to know, duplex doesn't have the self-sufficiency test. Once you start getting into tri and fourplex, and in residential lending, we cap at 4. That's typically our spot. I have some non-QM investors that'll do like 5, 6, 7 unit. They cap out actually at 8, but duplexes don't have that. So it's a little bit easier to qualify with minimum down on a duplex because they're not going to like hold you to that self-sufficiency test. But when you get into these, higher units and you're trying to put minimum down, and maybe it's an $800,000 home, those 3 other units might not support it. But let's say you've got leases on those other 3 units and they are supporting it. Well, there could be a very strong argument to pull the trigger on that. Lifestyle also matters too. Like if you're a single individual and you're like, I'm cool, I'll live in one, and it pencils out and it passes a self-sufficiency test. I mean, this is amazing. Like, but some of us, if you've got families and young kids, like that may not be feasible. So it's kind of your lifestyle situation also depends on whether or not the deal works. But from a penciling standpoint, the other 3 units on a fourplex have got to cover the mortgage payment.
Right.
And that
right.
becomes a little difficult when you're looking at a price point, 6,
Right.
7, 800,000.
Well, and that's where we need to be able to write an offer and justify why we're coming in lower, right? So you can adjust numbers down in an offer to show what pencils and write that offer. Listing agents are putting a number out there based on what they want, their sellers telling them they want for the property, but we can come back and say, this is what it actually like pencils for. Like, this is what it's going to cost. And in order to get a loan on this, unless they have cash and they're got 30% or 25% down, that offer may never come. And then this is why a lot of commercial and multifamily properties sit on the market for so long, is because unless the cap rate makes a lot of sense and they can go, they have an investor who's going to throw cash at it, this is where we can communicate what the property's really, what it's really worth based on what the numbers actually run when they try to get a loan. So, I mean, and of course they may not take it, but at least adjusting down the price can adjust whether, it makes sense. So
that's a great point. It's kind of like that pre-1976 manufactured home, right? Like you've limited your buyer pool because 90% of lenders aren't going to lend on that property. Same thing, like if the loan requirements say it has to pencil, and you're marketing now just to cash investors or only investors, they've limited their buyer pool. And so like, that's where, like, I think going back to your point, like you could make a strong argument, like, why are we coming in this low? Well, this is how it pencils. And that's going to be received a little better by a listing agent versus like, we just think it's worth that. You've done the math, this is the math behind it. And this is the why behind it. And these aren't like, we're not just like pulling these numbers out of nowhere. Like we can actually do a calculation and say, at this price point with the units rent, like, let me see the leases. All right, this pro forma, this is what it would need to be if you want to market this to people that are trying to own or occupy a property and put less than 20% down. And then you can maybe have a shot at getting a great deal in that scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we've got another.
Which one's the better deal? Whoever's qualified. No, no, I would say this. So I've had a lot of people buy multifamily. In this scenario, I like the pro forma on the 4 unit. I really do. The question is how much. It's got to be 20% down for that 4 unit to really maximize for somebody.
Okay.
So that's the ultimate question is who's coming in with 20% down. If it's less than 20, we got to go lower in price because it's going to be very difficult for you, not only from a qualifying standpoint, but just to have the numbers math. So if it's 20% down, I like the 4 unit. And the way I look at multifamily is like, if you've got 4 units rented and one tenant stops paying and you've got to get a replacement tenant, you've mitigated some of your risk, right? You've got more units to help cover your monthly nut. Whereas if you got a duplex and one of your tenants is gone, 50% of your rental income is gone. So I do like how you spread out your cash flow and you're not so dependent. Like if you've got a month where a tenant is not paying or you've got to get a replacement, you're not underwater as quickly. So I do like the ability of like multiplying the rents.
Diluting the risk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that to me, I think would also be an argument for why the fourplex could be a win.
Which goes back to the idea of pooling money together with a business partner,
Mhm.
or going, looking creatively to get that 20% down, which I think is the hurdle a lot of people are always kind of trying to jump through, is how do I get 20% down right now? How do I do that? Well, maybe you've got somebody who is happy to occupy, or you are, or there's just different ways to get that 20% down that, I mean, I think a lot of people aren't having a conversation about. So
You just reminded me of something too. Like a lot of folks who aren't huge entrepreneurs or maybe have tons of wealth, they have 401ks with their companies. And I'm not one that wants to preach tap into your retirement. Like that's not the take home message from this. But what I think oftentimes happen with a 401k, you get this provided by an employer and maybe they give you a match, but people aren't self-directing their 401ks. What is your real return on a 401k? You might be surprised. It might be 3%. You might be
right.
making 2.5%. Like we don't know what your actual rate of return is on the 401k. What people don't realize sometimes is you can pull from that 401k for a down payment on a home. That's one of the hardship withdrawal kind of reasons to do it. And it's considered a hardship withdrawal. You provide a copy of your loan estimate, your purchase contract, and they will let you pull from that and you don't have to pay yourself back. There is a tax implication. They'll treat that money that's pulled as earned income. So it could bump you in a tax bracket for that year, and there is a 10% penalty for withdrawal. But if you see like a screaming opportunity to invest and you've got 100 grand in your 401k and it's just inching along, what a cool opportunity to be like, hey, you know what? I'm not going and buying a car with this. I'm going to go take money from my 401k. This is a balance sheet move, buy myself some real estate. And some folks don't realize they can do that. The other tool that's super powerful and cool is like you can pull from a 401k and you can decide to pay yourself back. You can borrow from yourself, pay yourself back with pre-tax dollars and invest in real estate. And I've got people that have done that before too. So other ways to maybe come up with that 5% or 10% down or whatever that number is. And again, that just kind of occurred to me as part of a relevant reason to bring up
that's
right
a good
now.
idea.
Yeah.
And I think another avenue that I've worked with in the past was negotiating on seller financing on land to improve the property, and then kind of get the seller to subordinate to our the construction loan, to try to basically create wealth where you have people that are kind of working towards the same goal, and both have the opportunity to win. And so you'll see a lot of people that have their lots listed as willing to carry, owner carry, right? Well, why would they do that? Why would they offer owner financing to somebody? Well, it's because they want to make the percentage on the loan on that percentage they're giving, as long as the person is coming in with a certain percentage down. So this just happened. I got a Zillow call, somebody who wanted to basically do a seller financing situation. They wanted to give, I think it was 30% down on the lot. The lot was, I decided to print this one just so you could see what I'm talking about, where the actual lot price is $66,900. It's a buildable lot, and they offer seller financing with, let's say, 20% down to 30% down. So they don't want to spend all the money on the lot outright. They want to create a note where it's interest only payments for 3 years, let's say, and they want the seller to subordinate to the new construction loan. So what that means is they want to be a second, not a first mortgage, and they'll let the construction loan be the first on the land. And I wanted Lewis to kind of explain on new construction loans, which I don't know if you do new construction loans, Lewis.
You know what? So new construction is very niche. And so I have a couple go-tos that I refer out, not because I don't think our team would be capable of it, but because I don't see it enough that it's not something that I'm, my go-to in terms of financing. but I know enough details about the construction financing world that I can give at least some commentary
Yeah,
on
for
it.
sure.
But if you guys need recommendations, there's a few banks that specialize in this. Like US Bank is amazing. Melissa Ferger is fantastic. National Bank of Arizona also is a great construction lender. And I love this idea here because I just hearing you talk about that, that is so creative, right? To be able to
Right.
do something like that, because the land can oftentimes be your down payment and equity in a construction loan. So if you've got the down payment with this land, now you're looking at options like a one-time construction loan where they don't have to fork out all this money because they've got the equity in the land in play. And that's a really powerful tool in construction financing. Some banks will allow you to kind of wrap it all as one package, but then you're getting into the down payment requirements, and it becomes a little stricter. And when you're doing construction financing, they want better credit, right? They want some reserves. They're a little stricter on the underwriting process. So if you could come in with a compensating factor like, hey, I've got some land equity, now you have some more options on the financing end, and you have to invest less capital. But that's super creative to come up with that avenue.
And this, I think, does work if you have a seller of land who is not selling their land anyway. It's sitting there because it's 1 out of 100 lots that are available in the price point that is in the ranch, for instance, or in one of these neighborhoods where there's a lot of land for sale. This could be a really creative way to basically dangle a carrot for a seller to get what they want for the land, and they don't have a huge they don't become cash poor in the process. And there is risk for the seller, but the seller is in a position where they're sitting on that lot probably for the next 10 years if they want to get top dollar anyway. So it is a really good opportunity to leverage, but you're leveraging together again with another person who is seeing the benefit of, the future benefit when you build the house and then sell the house and then you pay off that note, right? But you pay top dollar for the note. So you paid top dollar for the land, but you only put a certain percentage down, and then everybody's taking a little bit of a risk. So does anybody have any questions about that?
Yes.
Okay.
So you said you have to have equity in the land. So the land has to be worth more than what you have the note for?
And again, I probably defer to somebody that specializes in that in construction financing a little bit more, but typically whenever you're doing seller financing, the seller has a dollar amount that they need to walk with. That's kind of the primary question, right? If they've leveraged the land and already have like financing against it, probably going to be a little bit difficult at that point. So it's probably geared towards, I own my lot free and clear. I've been sitting on this thing for 1.5 years. I can't sell it. I'd be willing to take 25 grand cash, and I will do a seller carry for the difference. So the equity has to be in there. Absolutely. The question is, for the construction like financing, the bank you partner with to do they've got to be on board with that deal. And are they going to be willing to, have this subordinated second is what's going to be happening there.
And why wouldn't you just get the construction loan? I don't understand why we're doing 2 loans if we're also getting the construction loan.
Let's say the construction loan required 20% down payment. What this scenario would be geared toward is, hey, I've got a little bit of money, but what I'm trying to do is leverage this fact that I've got now some equity in the land, so to speak. And then you could use that towards kind of in combination with your construction loan. It's a little more creative there. And I see kind of your mindset is like, hey, if I've got a subordinated second, isn't that eating up all the equity in the land? I think the scenario would be like, let's say you put down 20% on the land. You've got a little bit of equity in that land. Now you're pairing it with the construction financing. Does that give you more options on the construction loan than if you were trying to come up with that same dollar amount as a down payment as a one-time construction loan? That's where I would see that scenario playing out. But I think the key is the lender that you're working with. Are they cool with the subordinated second? And you see this a lot, like US Bank does a lot of lot loans. Like they're super dialed in to that world. And so I know of clients that have financing on a piece of land,
Mhm.
and then they do a construction loan down the road, and they're taking whatever equities in that lot and putting it towards the construction loan. So I don't know the exact math behind it, but I know what's happening. But I agree, it's getting a little gray there on the equity piece.
And who do you recommend for construction loans?
I sent a lot of stuff to Melissa Ferger with US Bank. She's really, really just thorough and sharp. I've got another guy at National Bank of Arizona, which I think they have a local branch here. Whenever you're doing construction loans, one-time close is like the product you want. Basically, what that means is the client qualifies once. A lot of banks will do two-time closes, so they'll qualify at the beginning, and then they have to re-qualify at the end, which gets a little hairy. One of two reasons. What if the borrower has some kind of credit or income event between the start of construction and the end? That could be problematic, right? And sometimes it takes like a year and a half to build some of these homes. A lot can happen in a year and a half. The other downside is like nobody gets paid until, that two-time close, until the loan gets funded officially at the end. So one-time close is what you want, and making sure you're working with lenders that do that.
Sure. And I think as somebody who's trying to build wealth, we're the ones who see the potential income or the potential gain in building a property and selling it for a much higher margin, and making sure that it all makes sense to do a loan to get it to that place to either sell it, or if it's and that's actually a good question. What about building like a fourplex? Like, is that something that I could do and get a loan for in that same kind of profile, or would it require that 20% down, or could I do it with 5% down?
There are some one-time close products out there. Like there's an FHA and a VA one-time close out there that you don't have to put 20% down. Now there are some limits, like FHA in Yavapai County is 500 and roughly 525 is the max loan amount. So you have to see, is like my construction cost going to exceed the county limit for that? But there are options to do less than 20% down. The question is, does it fit within budget? When it comes to multifamily, like, I'll be honest, because I don't dive into it too much, there may be some restrictions on that front. But what a great opportunity if you could build and do multifamily. And I'm sure there's options out there from a lending standpoint.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like this is a lot of information. Does anybody have any questions from just the little amount that we talked about today? There's a lot of options, but I think it is, helpful for us to kind of get the conversation going so that we can ask more questions later. Any specific questions for Lewis?
Yeah.
You said, like, in the situation where you're buying with your friend or somebody that you're not like married to, there's certain precautions that you can put in place. What are those?
So I think whenever you're buying an investment property, if it's truly investment and somebody's like not occupying in there, maybe there's some kind of LLC or something that you can create on the back end. Now you got to be a little careful if it's an agency loan, if you do an LLC. But I don't know, from a legal standpoint, do you draw something up with an attorney that kind of clearly outlines an exit strategy, some kind of, not like a will, but like, some kind of legal document that says if X happens, this is the recourse, right?
When we break up.
When we break up.
What are we doing?
And this gets weird. How does this look? I think the bigger thing is, like, some people just don't have the conversation, and then it becomes very difficult towards the end. And so this could be a good opportunity for Title maybe to jump in a little bit. Have you seen anything with investors, like at closing, maybe you're notarizing a document where they've created some kind of, articles of organization or something for an investment purchase to kind of, perfect.
And they generally do go through an attorney. That's the smartest thing to do.
Perfect.
And if they do an LLC per property, multiple investments, a lot of times the LLC name will be the address. And so then they tie that LLC to each individual property. That way it keeps it very separate, very clean.
Perfect. So there's ways to, I think, yeah, just having it outlined, an attorney, all official, kind of keeps things organized if and when things get complicated. Yeah. Good question, though.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right.
Cool.
Well, I think this was really helpful, and I don't know where we are in time, but I think it's kind of a good ending place.
Yeah,
So
I appreciate you guys. I
you
know
guys could grab
everybody's.
some food that's here. I'm gonna grab some food. I'm hungry. So, but yeah, I just think this is really helpful, and we'll do more classes soon.
Awesome.